the century closed, theater had started to reflect a growing interest in turning away from melodrama, the mainstay of the later 19th century stage, and moved toward a stage that began to show flickers of real life, both in content and style. Many things were to influence this. Even David Belasco, whose own work as a playwright leaned heavily on the melodramatic form, was aware of the new tendency, which reached into even commercial theater.
The rise of realism is realism of some kind, is a characteristic of the 19th century. And Belasco, who had started out essentially as an actor in popular theater on the West Coast, realized this more than most people. At the same time, realized that actors were performing in relatively large, badly lit, relatively bad acoustic houses. Consequently, acting retains some of its 19th century quality because it has to in the 20th century. Steele Mackay was the founder of the American Academy of Dramatic Art, which was the first acting studio. When there was an acting school established with a faculty, the whole character of acting as a craft began to change.
And a short time later, some who had worked with one of the great theatrical contributors of his time, Konstantin Stanislavski, started to work in or open their own schools here.
The American Laboratory Theater was founded by Richard Boleslavsky. Boleslavsky had been a member of the Moscow Art Company. It was an example of how the influences of Europe were still very strong in the United States in theatrical production. Boleslavsky essentially taught a kind of Stanislavskian method of acting. And as such, it became the wellspring of other schools of acting using the Stanislavski approach.
The American Laboratory Theater was a kind of petri dish for trying out some of the new. Even its school paper was cautiously optimistic about the new role of education for the theater. Its editors wrote, "Creative education starts with life and ends with new life. It must take life from the workshop or laboratory to actual breathing reality, and there give it over to itself." Boleslavsky disliked any of the new isms for being too defining. Realism, expressionism, naturalism. He wanted no labels. He cautioned his actors, learn to be crisp, a very few words. That is more difficult than to drown the stage with lights, hundreds of people, and so on. Never mind what it's called. Make it good and to the purpose. Boleslavsky had worked with Stanislavski, the great Russian director, teacher, and head of the Moscow Art Theater, who had pioneered sweeping changes in how the actor could approach and prepare his or her work. His vision was interpreted and even misinterpreted in many different ways. There was no one correct, prescriptive Stanislavskian truth, although some would have us think so. It would need multiple transformations before it acquired American voices.